This is the moment that decides whether the bombs start again. Not in 6 months, not after another round of failed diplomacy. Wednesday evening, that is the deadline. That is when a 2-week ceasefire between the United States and Iran expires, and every military asset that went quiet on April 7th goes back on the clock. Trump said it directly on Monday in a phone call with a PBS reporter. If no deal is reached before the ceasefire expires, then lots of bombs start going off. Those were his exact words. Lots of bombs. No diplomatic language, no strategic ambiguity, lots of bombs. As of this morning, Iran's foreign ministry has officially said it has no plans to send a delegation to Islamabad for a second round of talks. The U.S. delegation, led by Vice President J.D. Vance, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner, is preparing to fly to Pakistan anyway. Pakistan's capital has soldiers stationed at security checkpoints around the Serena Hotel, where talks are expected to take place. Billboards welcoming negotiators have already been put up across Islamabad. The rooms are prepared, the mediators are ready, and Iran has not confirmed it is coming. This is not a diplomatic scheduling dispute. This is a country of 90 million people, a region of 400 million more, and an oil market that controls the cost of everything from fuel to food for the entire global economy, sitting inside a 48-hour window that ends in either a framework for peace or a resumption of the deadliest conflict the Middle East has seen in decades. At least 3,375 people have been killed since February 28th. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 21% of the world's oil travels, has been blockaded, contested, and fought over for 7 weeks. And right now, the single question that determines what happens next is whether a delegation from Tehran boards a plane to Islamabad today. In this breakdown, we are going to explain exactly what broke down in round 1, what Iran actually wants that Washington refuses to give, why the ceasefire itself has been violated by both sides since the moment it was announced, and what the next 48 hours will determine about the future of this conflict and the world that has to live with its outcome. America and Iran are not just negotiating a ceasefire, they are negotiating whether 2 decades of maximum pressure has finally produced a deal or finally produced a war that cannot be ended. On April 7th, after weeks of escalating bombardment, a naval blockade, and a death toll crossing 3,000, the United States and Iran agreed to a temporary ceasefire. 2 weeks, a pause, time to talk. The framework was negotiated through Pakistan's Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir, who shuttled between Washington, Tehran, and Islamabad, carrying messages that neither side would deliver directly to the other. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif announced the agreement and called it a historic opportunity. Trump called Iran's 10-point proposal a significant step. The Strait of Hormuz showed its first signs of reopening. Oil prices dropped. People in Tehran went outside. The plan was to use those 2 weeks to reach a framework for a permanent agreement, not the full deal, not the final text. Just enough of a foundation to justify extending the ceasefire and continuing to negotiate. The ceasefire framework had 3 requirements: an immediate halt to hostilities, a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and 15 to 20 days of structured negotiations between Iranian and American officials in Islamabad. What was supposed to happen was clear. What actually happened was different in almost every specific. 5 days after the ceasefire was announced, on April 11th, Vance, Witkoff, and Kushner flew to Islamabad for the first round of talks. Iran sent its foreign minister Abbas Araghchi and parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the highest-level direct U.S.-Iran engagement since 1979. 21 hours of negotiations, Pakistani mediators working through the night. And when it ended, Vance walked out and said, "We just could not get to a situation where the Iranians were willing to accept our terms. I think we were quite flexible." Araghchi's side told a different story. The enrichment question was the wall. America demanded 0 uranium enrichment on Iranian soil. Iran refused. That was not a new demand, and it was not a new refusal. It was the same wall that collapsed the JCPOA negotiations in early 2026. The same wall that existed before the war started. 21 hours of talks, and the wall did not move. Then, 2 days after those talks failed, on April 13th, Trump announced a naval blockade of Iranian ports. Not a continuation of the existing enforcement posture, a full blockade. Any vessel originating from or destined for Iranian ports would be intercepted. Iran called it a direct violation of the ceasefire agreement. The IRGC called it unlawful. Iran's foreign ministry called it proof that America was not serious about diplomacy, and the wall got higher. On Monday, April 20th, at a moment when both delegations were supposed to be finalizing travel arrangements for round two, the United States military seized an Iranian container ship called the Touska in the Gulf of Oman. American forces fired rounds from a 5-inch gun into the ship's engine room. Marines rappelled from helicopters onto the deck. The seizure was announced on social media by President Trump himself. The Touska was heading from China to Iran. Its cargo has not been fully disclosed publicly. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, Ismail Bagay, responded immediately. He called the naval blockade unlawful and criminal. He called it a war crime and a crime against humanity. He said Washington's provocative actions and continued ceasefire violations were a major obstacle to diplomacy. Parliament Speaker Ghalibaf said on X that Trump was trying to turn the negotiating table into a table of surrender or to justify renewed warmongering. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian posted directly, "Deep historical mistrust in Iran toward U.S. government conduct remains, while unconstructive and contradictory signals from American officials carry a bitter message. They seek Iran's surrender. Iranians do not submit to force." While those statements were being made, the New York Times reported, citing two senior Iranian officials, that a delegation from Tehran was making plans to head to Islamabad on Tuesday anyway, not the foreign ministry's public position, the actual operational movement. And while that report was circulating, Trump posted on Truth Social that the U.S. was offering a very fair and reasonable deal and warned Iran directly, "We are going to knock out every single power plant and every single bridge in Iran. No more Mr. Nice Guy." Pause. Within the same 24-hour window on Monday, April 20th, Iran officially said it is not coming. Anonymous Iranian officials told the New York Times it is coming. Trump threatened to destroy Iran's entire infrastructure. The U.S. delegation confirmed it was departing for Islamabad soon, and only 16 ships traversed the Strait of Hormuz all day, compared to normal daily traffic of more than 20 large vessels, as captains around the world watched the ceasefire clock and kept their ships in port. This is what a negotiation that is simultaneously collapsing and continuing looks like from the inside. According to sources familiar with the internal Iranian deliberations, the reason Tehran's public position and its private movement are pointed in opposite directions is the same reason round one ended without a deal. Iran does not have one negotiating position. It has two governments producing two positions simultaneously. There is the diplomatic government centered on Foreign Minister Araghchi that flew to Islamabad for 21 hours, that called Hormuz open on Friday, April 18th, that is maintaining back-channel contact with Pakistani mediators and understands that if the ceasefire collapses Wednesday and bombing resumes, the next phase will be structurally harder to survive than the last. This Iran wants a deal, not on American terms, but it wants one. It knows the blockade is real. It knows what resumed bombing means for a population already absorbing 3,375 dead and 307 damaged healthcare facilities. And then there is the IRGC government. Hardliners who overruled Araghchi within hours of his Hormuz announcement, who fired gunboats at tankers on Saturday, who issued the retaliation statement after the Touska seizure, whose national security advisor Mahdi Mohammadi said publicly, "Without fully restraining America's rabid dog in Lebanon, there will be no ceasefire or negotiations, and the missiles are ready to launch." This Iran does not want a deal on any terms that resemble the ones on the table. It views any concession on uranium enrichment as surrender, and it will not deliver surrender. The contradiction between Iran's official no-travel statement from the foreign ministry spokesman and the anonymous senior official telling the New York Times a delegation is preparing to leave is not confusion. It is the sound of those two governments fighting the internal argument in real time. And which government wins that argument in the next 12 hours determines whether a plane takes off from Tehran today. On the American side, the internal picture is also not unified. Former Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman told NPR directly the Trump administration came in with maximalist demands and actually just wanted Iran to capitulate. No nation, even one as odious as the Iran regime, is going to capitulate. Robert Malley, a former Iran negotiator, confirmed to NPR that the level of trust is probably almost at an all-time low. It is hard for Iran to take at their word what they are hearing from the U.S. side. These are not critics speaking from the outside. These are people who negotiated directly with Iran for years, telling you that the framework the current administration is using is not structured to produce a deal. It is structured to produce a capitulation that Iran will not deliver. The Islamabad hotel rooms are ready. The Pakistani mediators are standing by. And in Tehran and Washington, two governments are each fighting their own internal argument about whether to walk through the door. The single issue that collapsed round one was uranium enrichment. America's demand is zero enrichment on Iranian soil, verified permanently, with no pathway to resume. Iran's position is that civilian nuclear enrichment is a sovereign right under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that accepting permanent zero enrichment would be indistinguishable from accepting permanent subordination to American demands. This is not a gap that can be split. There is no halfway point between zero enrichment and the right to enrich. Either Iran keeps a civilian enrichment program or it does not. And every expert who has negotiated with Iran over the past 20 years is telling you that Iran will not accept zero, regardless of what military pressure is applied. This matters for the 48-hour deadline because it means the gap that will still exist when the talks in Islamabad begin is the same gap that existed before the war started. The war has not changed the terms. It has only changed the trust level, and the trust level, as Robert Malley and every other former negotiator is now saying publicly, is almost at an all-time low. Oman-based indirect talks on February 6th produced nothing. The first Islamabad round after 21 hours of direct engagement produced nothing. What makes round two different is not a new offer from either side. It is the fact that the ceasefire expires Wednesday evening, and both sides understand what comes after it. This is why Pakistan matters more in this negotiation than any previous mediator has mattered. Pakistan is not just a venue. Asim Munir has personal relationships with both Araghchi and the American delegation that were built during the ceasefire negotiations in early April. He was the one who physically traveled to Tehran carrying Washington's message. He was the one who received a warm hug from Araghchi on the tarmac. That relationship is the only channel that has produced any movement in this conflict, and Pakistan's ability to keep that channel open while both sides are simultaneously threatening escalation and preparing to resume talks is the most important diplomatic act happening anywhere in the world right now. The immediate goal at this stage is not a full deal, not even close. The realistic goal for round two, according to Pakistani officials who spoke to Al Jazeera, is a ceasefire extension, a framework for continued negotiations, enough of a foundation to justify not resuming the bombing on Wednesday night. Whether that is achievable depends entirely on whether the enrichment question can be set aside as a later phase negotiation rather than a prerequisite for the ceasefire extension itself. If the ceasefire expires without an extension, Trump has said clearly and on the record that he will not extend it. Bombing resumes. The Strait of Hormuz, which has been only partially functional for 7 weeks with 16 ships per day instead of the normal 20 or more, closes completely. Brent crude, which closed Monday at $94 per barrel, moves toward $120 an hour according to every major energy trading desk model that analysts have published in the past 2 weeks. At $120 per barrel, the cost of that price increase lands on every economy in the world that imports oil. India, Japan, South Korea, Germany. None of them are party to this conflict. All of them absorb the consequence. While Trump is threatening to knock out every power plant in Iran, European governments are watching this with a specific calculation. They backed American sanctions on Iran diplomatically. They did not back the military campaign publicly. A ceasefire collapse that resumes bombardment and pushes oil to $120 creates a domestic political crisis for European leaders who are already managing inflation and energy security after years of supply disruption. Their silence on the current ceasefire crisis is not indifference. It is the silence of governments that have no lever to pull and do not want to be visibly associated with the outcome. And while European governments are calculating their exposure, Iran's own population is fracturing along lines that make any long-term outcome more complicated. Some Iranians have publicly supported the campaign as a force that might finally break the Islamic Republic. Others have posted videos begging Trump not to negotiate with the regime because it would legitimize it. Still others are posting from Tehran describing conditions that sound like a war zone and calling for an immediate ceasefire. An Iranian man posted a video in English begging Western governments not to negotiate with Iran's government before taking his own life. These are not political categories. These are human beings inside a conflict that began 7 weeks ago and has already killed 375 of them. A negotiation that fails Wednesday does not just resume a military campaign. It resumes a campaign inside a population that is already at its limit, inside a healthcare system that has already lost 307 facilities, inside an economy that has been under maximum sanctions and maximum bombardment simultaneously for the past 2 months. Whatever comes after Wednesday, if Wednesday comes with no deal, is harder than anything that came before it. The answer from every expert who has negotiated with Iran before is the same. A comprehensive final deal is not possible in 48 hours. It was not possible in the 21 hours of round one. The 2015 JCPOA took months of expert-level negotiations after years of framework building. What is possible in 48 hours is narrower and more specific: a ceasefire extension agreement with a defined timeline for continued talks, a mutual pause on escalation language, a commitment from Iran to rejoin the table, and a commitment from America to suspend the naval blockade for the duration of the extended ceasefire. That is the achievable outcome. It is not peace. It is the absence of resumed war while the harder work continues. There are 3 signals in the next 24 hours that will tell you whether even that minimum is achievable. The first signal is whether Ghalibaf boards a plane. The New York Times reported that Iran's parliament speaker confirmed he would attend if Vance also attends. Ghalibaf is not a diplomat. He is a former IRGC commander and the most powerful military political figure in the Iranian delegation. If he comes to Islamabad, it means the IRGC government has calculated that showing up serves Iran better than staying home. If Ghalibaf stays in Tehran, the diplomatic government lost the internal argument, and the hardliners are driving Iran's position into the ceasefire expiration. The second signal is whether Trump stops threatening publicly before the talks begin. Every threat Trump posts on Truth Social between now and Wednesday is read inside Tehran as evidence that America's negotiating position is submission or destruction. Wendell Sherman said it clearly: no nation is going to capitulate. If Trump wants a deal before Wednesday, the most important thing he can do today is stop telling Iran it has 2 options and start letting Pakistan carry the message privately. Public ultimatums from a president who called a whole civilization will die tonight the week before the ceasefire are not negotiating pressure at this stage. They are negotiating poison. The third signal is the Touska. Iran has demanded the return of the seized ship as a condition for re-engagement. The U.S. has not responded to that demand publicly. If the Touska is quietly returned, or if a public commitment to review its status is made before the delegations sit down, it creates enough of a good faith gesture to give Araghchi's faction the internal argument it needs to justify walking into the room. If the Touska stays seized with no comment, Iran's foreign ministry statement that America lacks seriousness in diplomacy becomes the dominant public narrative going into Wednesday. Here is the reality that 48 hours cannot change, but 72 hours can determine. The war between the United States and Iran has no clean military ending. America cannot bomb Iran into accepting zero enrichment. Iran cannot fire missiles into Israel without absorbing consequences that make its domestic position untenable. The only ending that does not produce decades of consequences that neither side can manage is a negotiated one. Both sides have people who know this. Both sides have people who are trying to get a delegation into a room in Islamabad before Wednesday night. Whether those people win their internal arguments in the next 48 hours is the only question that matters right now in global geopolitics. Watch every flight out of Tehran. Watch what Trump posts before Tuesday morning. Watch whether the Touska comes up in any official statement. The answers to those 3 questions will tell you more than any press briefing, any threat, and any official statement issued between now and when the ceasefire clock runs out. Subscribe and stay here. If the delegation moves, we go live. If Wednesday comes without a deal, we break down what comes next immediately. This is the 48 hours that changes what the next year looks like. Do not look away.